They'll almost always come up at some point in a competition, so it's really important that I can execute it within 4 or 5 minutes.
It's time for another coaching session with a pro. This time we are proud to welcome Lattice team athlete Erin McNeice. Erin has stormed onto the adult competition circuit, coming 5th in the Paris Olympics and racking up podium places on the World Cup circuit. She has developed her own unique climbing style and tricks on how to perform alongside the world's best. This is how to climb like Erin McNeice.
So the first skill I'm going to talk about is swings. Swings may be a bit of an ambiguous term, but traditionally it would be both feet off, swinging onto a hold and then grabbing another hold. And there's sort of a point where you have no points of contact, so no limbs on the wall. And then other swings, like maybe just swinging one leg and you've always got a point of contact on the wall. Swings are really important for me as a competition climber, because they'll almost always come up at some point in a competition. So it's really important that I understand the movement and that I can execute it within 4 or 5 minutes. I think swings are difficult firstly because there's so many different types and you need to sort of be able to understand the movement of all of them, knowing where your body is on the wall and in space, knowing where your hips are meant to be, and then just being able to execute it really quickly is really difficult. So the more that I practice it, the more my body sort of knows what to do straight away. In training, I try to practice it to understand it, and then in competition, I don't really need to understand it as much, and I can just sort of rely on intuition more. So sort of at some point, I'm going to have no points of contact on the wall. It's, I guess, more like up than it is sideways, and both of the holds are quite good, but usually with a swing, I try to pretend that the hold I'm going to is quite bad, because then it just means that when my body's in a position to grab the hold, it's just in the best position it can be. And most of the time with like a swing, because it's a complex movement, there's so much stuff to focus on, so I try and focus on like one thing and then the rest of my body will do what it needs to do. So usually I'll focus on my hips and like the pathway that my hips take throughout the movement, so that the rest will sort of just fall into place. When I'm on the wall, I'll be looking at the hold that I'm going to, just because where I look is where I go. And then just before I go for the movement, I'll look at the foot really quickly just to make sure that I'm not going to completely miss it. But most of the time I'm looking at the hold that I'm going to. For the beginning of the jump, the back and forth movement, not only is it good to like start building the momentum for the swing, but I also think it helps me visualize where my hips are going to go. I can sort of imagine like a line when I'm building the momentum up, and that helps me see the pathway that my hips are currently taking and the pathway that they're going on. So it just helps my body do the rest. I'd say if you're struggling with these kinds of swings, it's really useful to take a step back and look at the entire problem, because it's such a fast movement. Your mind doesn't really have time to think about it when you're on the wall doing it. So it's really useful for me to look at it in slow-mo in my head from the floor, so that I can see what my legs are doing and what my hips are doing, what my upper body's doing. Even tiny things like what way I'm looking, where my head is, can affect just your movement on the wall. Sort of like you've come up with a plan off the wall and you can execute it better when you're on the wall. I think a lot of people struggle with the distance between the handholds, and you almost try and rush grabbing the hold that you're going to. If I'm really struggling with a move, I'll just not focus on grabbing the handhold at all, just so that I can find the good body positioning. If it feels good, then I'll like put my hands to where the hold is, but I think a lot of the time if you're too focused on grabbing it, your hips will be bad. And in comps as well, well, 99% of the time the hold won't be good, so you can't rely on it being a bucket. So I'd probably still characterise this as a swing. I guess it's just a different swing, it's not really a lâcher. You always have one point of contact on the wall, it's just different, but you're still swinging your leg. With swings like this, I think there's sort of 2 ways that you can do them, and it's just based off which you prefer. Since you're running across a volume, you can either do like the slingshot method, which is sort of less like hips parallel to the wall, more running across the volume. Yeah, just more aggressive. Or you can do more of a swing, where you sort of swing your hips parallel and then move on. I much prefer the hips parallel just because I think it's more controlled and less aggressive. It's definitely possible with the slingshot, it's just you have to put a lot more force into it because your hips aren't in the best position. Again, I'm focusing most on hips. Slightly less complex than a lache in terms of like the pattern of the hips, because it will just be diagonally up. As long as you're focusing more on the hips than the hands, it's a lot less complex than a lache would be. I think when you're running along volumes, you obviously don't want to be really high up close to the wall, but you also don't, depending on how big the volume is, you don't want to be right on the edge of it, because this one's quite chunky, so if you're right on the edge, it might almost be like too far away from the wall basically. So I'd say like middle, so it gives your hips like a bit of leniency. They're not like right against the wall, but they're not really far out of the wall. And especially with this one, because the holds are quite far away, you want to be slightly further away from the wall so that your right leg can cross through. Otherwise, if you're right up against it, it's going to be really awkward to do that. Again, with like your ankle, you don't want it to be really dropped, but you also don't want it to be really high. So I guess in the middle gives you a good control over your hips again. If your ankle's really dropped, I don't think you have enough control to bring your right leg through and cross your feet. It's okay to have your foot beyond your hip, but then it will have to be like not engaged until your hip is over your foot, because otherwise you'll just bounce yourself off the wall in the opposite direction that you want to go in. So the next skill would be slopers. Again, slopers are really important for me as a comp climber. There'll never be a competition where I don't have to climb on slopers. I think this problem highlights how important body positioning is when you're climbing on slopers. Obviously, you can be really strong at holding them, but if your body positioning is wrong, it'll either make it a lot harder or impossible to climb on them. I'd say the main thing would be having a counterbalance or a counterpoint that sort of gives you the ability to have body tension on a sloper. So either having like a heel that's pulling the other way or a toe that's pulling the other way, but then being able to actually use that and being able to put your hips into the right place. If you're pulling on a toe that's pulling in the opposite direction, but your hips are dropped way lower or way higher than the handhold, then it's still going to be really hard. So having almost like a straight line of your body just makes it a lot easier to hold. The more obvious factor about holding slopers would be just strength in your forearms and in your wrists and in your fingers. It's definitely like a skill as well to learn, just how to hold slopers and how you want to hold them. Some people like to sort of separate their fingers, which just feels so unnatural to me. I prefer to have my fingers together, because then you have the friction between your fingers and the holds, and then you have the friction between your own fingers. Just sort of feels more secure for me. Even if I'm slipping off the hold, I still have like a bit of friction between my fingers. And then like wrist curls, and those are the muscles that you're engaging when you're holding slopers, so obviously just strength gains there help to improve your sloper ability. I always like try and crimp slopers, so I'm just trying to force myself to not do that. Most of the time it's the best way through for me. With slopers like that, they're quite like deep almost, so sometimes it can feel more comfortable to crimp the good bit instead, because it's just like quite flexed, like it's quite a flexed position. Because I hangboard on slopers to sort of teach my hands the positioning for that. I don't even really add any weight, I just do it to get into the position more. The main reason I do that is because a lot of the time in comps, you'll be given a slope set in a way that you're not meant to spend much time on it. You're sort of just meant to move through it quickly. And in that position, it's hard to crimp instead of holding it as a sloper, just because you don't have the time to find the right part of the hold to do that. So it's important that I can basically use a sloper without having to find a way to crimp it, just so that I can move through it quickly. So the third point, I guess, isn't really a skill, it's more like a tactical choice that I do most of my sessions. A lot of my sessions, especially now, are like focused on movement, low percentage moves, competition moves. So to make sure that I'm learning as much as possible. Once I've done a low percentage move, I'll do it 3 times in a row. Like if I do it twice and then fall off, I have to start from 0 again, just to make sure that the move is drilled in. Like I said before, in the comp, for me especially, it's like very much focused on like intuition. So if my body doesn't know what it's doing, then I just won't execute the move in time. I think in training, if you can do a low percentage move and you work it for ages and then you do it, that's really good. But being able to do it again, multiple times in a row is a lot more important, because if you can't, then you haven't really learned it, you've just done it once, which isn't massively helpful in competition climbing. Because of comp climbing and like having zones and tops, a lot of the time the move to the zone will be really hard, and then the move to the top will be really hard. So it's really helpful to be able to execute it immediately after, just because if it takes you multiple attempts to get the top move, then you know that once you've done the zone move, you can move through it and learn the top move. I think it just gives you way more leeway in comps, because like it's taken me 3 minutes before to dial in a move, and then immediately after that I can do it multiple times in a row and it's fine. So I definitely think it's like a really useful tactical thing to put into my training.
If you want to train smarter and harder, you need to check out A Climber's Guide to Training. Today, we are relaunching our most comprehensive online training course, where you'll get access to new lessons. You're going to be part of a training community with an online forum where you can also get direct support from our coaches. Plus, you'll get early access to our new app, where you'll have access to climbing's largest exercise library, timers, a week scheduler, and analytics to help you be your own coach. Hit the link below to get started.